You know, I always thought being a leader meant being completely bulletproof, having all the answers all the time. But then, one very memorable Tuesday afternoon in a stuffy conference room, I found out that my biggest leadership breakthrough would come from my most spectacular public failure.
So get this, the client is right there staring at our supposedly game-changing new app, which is showing nothing but a little oops message on the screen. The projector, meanwhile, is making this high-pitched whining sound, like it's about to achieve liftoff. It was 15 solid minutes of just pure, unadulterated technical chaos. This was supposed to be our shining moment, and instead it was turning into a highlight reel for corporate disasters. You can practically see the war going on in my brain right here. Every fiber of my being, every corporate instinct I'd ever developed was screaming at me. Abort, reschedule, blame the Wi-Fi, blame Mercury retrograde, anything. The standard playbook says you project absolute control. You reschedule, and you pretend this whole nightmare just didn't happen. But for some reason, these other words just came out. Words that honestly felt like I was writing my own resignation letter.
And then came the plot twist I never saw coming. The client, he actually liked it. Can you believe that? Liked it. Turns out, he'd seen a million perfect, slick demos for products that ended up being total vaporware. Our very messy, very public failure was, in his eyes, a feature, not a bug. It was real. And as it turns out, being real builds a heck of a lot more trust than a perfect PowerPoint ever could. Go figure.
So I thought, okay, crisis averted, we survived, the client trusts us, we can all go back to normal now. But that single accidental moment of honesty, it set off this chain reaction that I absolutely did not see coming. It started to change the entire dynamic of my team. And that's where this story gets really interesting.
Let's talk about the daily stand-up meeting for a second. You know the one. It's that daily ritual where everyone kind of performs for each other, using all the right buzzwords to sound as busy and in control as possible. It's basically an improv class for corporate jargon. Well, after the great demo disaster of that Tuesday, the performance, it just stopped.
And this just nails the change. Exploring alternatives is just corporate speak for I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm pretty sure I'm going in circles. But now, Karthik just says it. I'm stuck. I need help. Priya stops considering approaches and just asks for a second pair of eyes on her test plan. By accidentally showing them that I was fallible, I'd somehow given the whole team permission to be human too.
And of course, that's when my own anxiety kicks back in, right? Okay, so it worked once. But what happens if I keep doing this? Am I going to become the I'm not totally sure guy? Is my team going to start thinking I'm completely clueless? Which, let's be honest, I sometimes was. It was all getting really confusing, and it wasn't until a tough conversation with Vikram about his own imposter syndrome that I realized I needed a rulebook for this stuff.
So I did what any manager does when they're totally lost. I went to my own mentor, Kavita. I just laid it all out for her. The demo, the team's weird new honesty, my own panic. I basically asked her, how do I do this vulnerability thing without my team losing all respect for me and staging a mutiny? And what she laid out for me? Well, it changed everything. She called it the vulnerability spectrum.
She gave me this one simple question, this one test that just cut through all of my confusion. It immediately became my North Star for everything. Is what I'm about to share meant to help them, to build a safer, more open environment? Or is it really about helping me, about getting something off my chest? The intent behind it, that's the whole ballgame.
Kavita drew out this spectrum for me, and it was like a light bulb went off. On the far left, you have invulnerability. That was my old playbook, the corporate robot leader who's never wrong. All that does is create fear. On the far right, you have oversharing, the leader who treats their team like a therapist. That just makes everyone uncomfortable and crushes their confidence in you. But the magic, she said, is right there in the sweet spot in the middle, appropriate vulnerability.
And this is what that sweet spot looks like day to day. It's not about sharing your deepest, darkest secrets. It's about the work. It's saying, I don't have the answer to that. Let's figure it out. It's owning a mistake. And then, and this part is crucial, sharing what you actually learned from it. It's about being open about the team's challenges and asking for help. It models the idea that being a pro isn't about being perfect. It's about constantly learning.
Now for the don'ts. This is the real danger zone. The second you start unloading your personal drama, you've crossed a major line. Complaining about your own boss, talking about how hopeless things are, you basically stop being the person who provides safety and you start being another person who needs it. You're making your team responsible for your emotional well-being, which is definitely not in their job description.
Kavita had this great term for it, optimal distinctiveness.
Here's the simple way to think about it. Your team needs to see you as the leader, yeah? You have to be distinct. But if you're too distinct, too polished, too perfect, you're not a person anymore. You're just a figurehead. Appropriate vulnerability is the bridge. It makes you just human enough that they can relate to you and trust you while still respecting you as their leader.
Okay, so now I had the theory, I had the spectrum, I had the rules. It felt like I'd been handed a cheat code for leadership. But now came the really hard part, actually putting it into practice.
So, at our very next team retrospective, I decided to go first. Before asking what went wrong with the project, I owned up to something I did. I admitted that I'd cut Neha off in a meeting earlier that week, and I apologized. And it was wild. You could just feel the tension drain out of the room. It wasn't about blame anymore. A second later, Karthik admitted he'd rushed to code review. Then Samir admitted he'd been stuck on a problem for days. My one small act of ownership made space for everyone else's.
I also got a lot better at setting boundaries. You can be human without making your team your emotional support group. This slide shows the difference perfectly. The first statement is context. Hey, here's what's going on in my life so you can manage expectations of me. The second one is unloading. Here is my heavy emotional burden. Please hold this for me. It's a subtle difference, but it's everything.
So looking back at that disastrous demo, I realized the whole experience had completely flipped my idea of leadership on its head. Everything I was taught to see as a weakness was actually a source of incredible strength.
And that brings us to the heart of it all, the vulnerability paradox. It's this completely counterintuitive idea that we all struggle with. We burn so much energy trying to project this image of perfect competence because we think that's what earns respect. But it's just a performance, and deep down people know it. Real, lasting trust doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being authentic.
So I actually started writing this stuff down, and these became my new unofficial rules. Being real works faster than being right. When I own my stuff, it gives them space to own theirs. And vulnerability has to lead somewhere. It has to lead to a solution or a lesson. Otherwise, you're just complaining. And it always comes back to that one question from Kavita. Who is this for?
And that really leaves me with this one last thought. If being the strong leader isn't about being perfect, but about being brave enough to admit you're not, if that's what builds trust and makes teams better, then why is it so terrifying for us to do? What are we all so afraid of?